Shalom Chaverim. My name is Jordan Lavender, and I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present some thoughts on Parashat Beshalah. This parasha is full of incredible meaning for the Jewish people. As God leads Moses and Bnei Israel across the Sea of Reeds, escaping Pharaoh's army, as Moses lifts his staff and splits the water in two. This scene is beautifully represented from one of my favorite animated films, The Prince of Egypt. Next, we have in the parasha the Song of the Sea, which is what I'll be focusing on today. This is a beautiful song that the Israelites and Moses sing to God, a song of praise and gratitude. Later in the parasha, the Israelites are fed by God miraculously, food and water, during their period in the desert. And finally, in this parasha, we have the attack of the Amalekites onto the Jewish people and the defeat of their enemies. The memory of the Amalekites is promised to be blotted out from history. This parasha is full of beautiful imagery and memorable scenes from our history. But I want to focus on something very specific, and that is the Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, and a specific few words at the beginning of it. As we know, the Song of the Sea is a portion of the daily Shacharit service found at the end of the Pesukei de Zimra section of the morning prayers, before we shift into the Kriyat Shema portion of the morning prayers. I wanted to focus on this part of the parasha because it is so familiar to us, and the things that are the most familiar to us are often the things that we don't really think about much in depth. We tend to autopilot through these portions of the liturgy and the Torah as we read them because they're so familiar to us. So looking at them again might be something beneficial for us to do. My formal background is in the field of linguistics, so I wanted to focus on a linguistic portion of the Song of the Sea as it begins in the fourth aliyah of this parasha, in the 15th chapter of the book of Shemot, or Exodus in English. And the question that I'm going to be looking at is how to translate the verb yashir, which opens up an interesting debate among the commentators about the Hebrew language and how the meaning of this verb in the Peshat and Midrashic sense affects our understanding of the word. This portion of the Torah is unique in its layout, a unique layout that's only shared with one other part of the Torah in Parashat Ha'azinu in Devarim. And it is set to beautiful melodies throughout the Jewish world. One of my favorites happening to be the Spanish and Portuguese melodies used for Az Yashir Moshe, which is also the inspiration for the beautiful song Bendigamos al Altísimo. So the focus of my thoughts today is on the three words Az Yashir Moshe, and the following Ubnei Israel et Hashira Hazot Laronai Vayomeru Lemor. Really just on the first few words there, but just to get the full context of the words that we'll be looking at. The commentators discuss the meaning of this word Az Yashir Moshe, which is, as I said, a seemingly unimportant detail of a majestic song. The debate centers around the use of the imperfect or future tense as we now know it, with the so-called Vav consecutive, which is a unique feature of biblical Hebrew, and is also found in other Semitic languages that are related to Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew does not have what we would call tenses in the modern sense of the word, but instead what is called an aspect, which is slightly different. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The Vav is unique in this case in that as a conjunctive, it can change the meaning or aspect of the verb from what we would call past to future. In this case, would really more accurately be called perfective to imperfective aspect. This trait does not appear in many world languages, and the use of future and past in this unique way brought to mind a comparison with the language of Catalan, which is spoken in eastern Spain around the city of Barcelona and the surrounding regions, which has form of using of the verb to go and an infinitive to express a past tense meaning. So the way of saying, the popular and vernacular way of saying you sang, for example, would actually would be using the words vas cantar, which means you go to sing, which brought to mind somewhat a kind of comparative aspect of what we see with the Hebrew use of vav here. So the commentators start to think about this word. Ibn Ezra starts out matter-of-factly as the grammarian that he is, noting that this is a feature of biblical Hebrew and also of Arabic. He notes, I'll let the Arabic experts among us note if that's true or not, that this is a common feature in the language and it doesn't have any other added meaning to it. So he would say that the meaning of the text is then Moshe and the children of Israel sang the song. However, other commentators add different nuances and understandings to that simple phrase. Rashi, for example, understands this to be a feature meaning, which he explains that after seeing the miracle of the splitting of the sea, that it enters Moshe's mind and heart to sing this song, which he will do. The use of the yod and the conjugation inflected form of the root of to sing implies intention, according to Rashi, and he offers sources to show his point. So for Rashi, then the text would mean something like, then Moshe and the children of Israel will sing, or intend to sing. So we can note the subtle difference in the meaning of the text with a slightly different understanding. Ramban Nachmanides notes that this is probably a normal pattern of speech among biblical writers, as a way of, and notes that there are countless examples of expressing the past tense using the imperfective forms, and was probably a manner of speaking at the time. He relates this to the use of narrative devices in writing, and how this is used to situate the narrator within the moment of telling a story. And Ramban's mentioning of this reminds me of a common narrative storytelling device in the English language, at least in my variety in the United States, where someone might be telling a story and you hear something like this. So I see Mike today at work and he says to me, using the present tense to tell a past tense story. But that situates the reader within the story and sort of increases one's participation in the events that are being narrated. And perhaps this was something that the effect that was affected by using the vav in such a way with the biblical language. The use of present tense in the English that I was just describing about is unusual, but helps highlight the story that's being told. We'll never really know 100% exactly what regular people spoke like in the biblical period, or if vav consecutive was something that was used regularly or only among the writers of Torah or other circles like that. But we can see that it could be an interesting literary device that is used to highlight the audience's participation and understanding of the stories that are being told, and other things that happen throughout Torah. Another interesting alternative comes from Rabbeinu Bachya, who suggests that maybe this should be read as a present tense rather than a future or past tense, and shows that maybe, and showing that this should maybe be read something like, then Moshe and the children of Israel sing, which has its own unique understanding of how we would understand it. And this sort of resonates with the narrative present that's used in English that I mentioned earlier. Any of these possibilities could be accurate in a certain sense, depending on, because of what I said earlier, that biblical Hebrew doesn't have tenses in the way that modern languages do. What we see here, the word yashir, is actually what's called the imperfective aspect, which is something that is used to describe ongoing, habitual, or repeated actions. that could be in the past, present, or future. So what we see here is that the use of yashir is focusing on maybe perhaps the ongoing nature of the song that is explaining the gratitude and praise of God after a miracle. And really the problem that we see is translating an ancient Semitic aspectual system to a European tense system in the verbs. And whenever we have translation like that, or any translation, we run into issues. And that's another thing that we should always have in mind when studying Torah, is that translating from Hebrew to English or ancient Hebrew to modern Hebrew always runs into some problems. Does this really matter? Obviously it would, or else I wouldn't have been sharing it with you. But to be precise in our understanding of the language of Torah does matter. It can affect the meaning of how we understand a text subtly, even if so. If we're talking about a past action, in this text, this is a response to the great miracle that was witnessed by the Israelites in Moshe. If we're focusing on the present tense meaning, as suggested by Rabbeinu Bachya, perhaps this is to highlight the meaning in a different way, perhaps highlighting the narrative aspect of the narrative function of the word. If the meaning is future, Moshe and the children of Israel will sing, then it points perhaps to something entirely different. And this is where the midrashic reading of the text comes into play, which is used by the rabbis in the tractate Sanhedrin 91b as an allusion to the resurrection of the dead in Torah, which we know is only alluded to in the Torah. And so this use of this understanding of the meaning as future ties into the midrashic reading as something that perhaps will happen in the future. We can even think of it as maybe some sort of heavenly song or messianic song, something that will happen responding to a future event, the miracle that hasn't yet happened. Hopefully this short video has sparked your interest in considering and analyzing the language of Torah in depth, and inspiring you to go back and look at often repeated portions of Torah in the liturgy or other functions, and to really study those in depth again, to learn what our rabbis and our tradition have to say. Thank you very much.